Hey everybody, my name is Evan and this is Corey Country. Today we're going to make a lathe station. Alright, so I thought I would start out this video with showing my cut list for this. I put this cut list together using Illustrator, which is a design program that I use in my everyday life. I am a full-time designer, and Illustrator is a program that I live and breathe. So as you can see, this whole project is made up with just over one sheet of plywood and a couple of 2x4s, which I don't have here, but they're pretty simple cuts. It's just a couple of chops on the miter saw and good to go. So as you're going to see here in a second, I decided to make a small table saw cart in between this video and my last, and that made it so easy to get to the bigger sheets that were in the back behind it before. I would not have been able to get these sheets out very easily without making that rolling cart. So I'm making my marks for my first couple of rip cuts. I can't cut the full sheet down on my table saw, it's just too heavy. So what I'm doing instead is using a dowel to find the center gap of the sawhorses that I have. That way my circular saw doesn't chop them up on the way through. And I can just make these into slightly more manageable parts, which I can then take to the table saw. I make sure to label these parts as well, just so I don't get anything confused. You'll hear me say in a second, but it's pretty easy to confuse parts that are similar widths. Alright, so now I have all the pieces cut down from the plywood. The only thing I'm missing is the 1/4 inch cuts right now, which is going to be the bottom of all the drawers and the back of the station itself. So now we're going to start doing all the cross cuts, which I have all labeled out here. And I have all of the drawers on the back. And the only other part that I'm missing is the face frame, which I'm going to do out of solid maple. I have solid maple already jointed and ready to be cut down, but I don't want to lose the pieces, so I'm not going to cut it down on the table saw yet. I'm also going to be very careful to label everything, especially the pieces that are like 15 3/4 versus 16, because I'll wind up screwing that one up 100 times. But I have everything pretty well labeled out. We'll see how it goes. So to make my first cross cuts, I decided to set up my sawhorses once again and use my table saw as a support, setting up a level as a straight edge and making sure it's square, and just running my circular saw. These parts are too big to risk that size of a kickback on the table saw, and my garage is kind of small, so trying to fit an 8-foot long piece on the table saw really isn't feasible. Then I head over to the miter saw and go fast, cutting out all the smaller parts that can fit on the miter saw with a crosscut just made a lot more sense. I do decide to cut down the 1/4 inch plywood now. Fairly quick cuts, it's just the drawer bottoms and the back of the station itself. Here is cutting down the face frame that I said I wasn't going to cut yet. I didn't really want to have to make a mess again with the table saw, so I figured I could just cut it all down now, and what I did was I put it right back up on the lumber rack that I have. That way I made sure I wouldn't lose it until I needed it. This temporary assembly table until I have my new fancy one built is just 2 sawhorses and an old sheet of plywood. And these are the pieces to the bottom frame itself. I cut them all down and I laid it out to make sure everything fit nice and tight. And then I took a file to the edge of these just because there was a little bit of blowout from cutting them down on the miter saw. And after they were all clean, I threw them through my pocket holing machine, which is really just me and the K4 Craig jig. And I found the easiest way to keep these at 90 degrees and nice and tight is to clamp them just directly to the assembly table. When I go to put these pocket hole screws in, these didn't even budge. It was a perfect solution. And once the frame was put together, I started putting pocket holes in the center panel, the top, and the bottom of the station. That way I can start assembly. I would always make sure to use a clamp when holding a piece vertically like this. It prevents this. As you can see, the clamp is now attached and the pocket holes went in nice and easy. Everything was nice and square, and then I just came back and drove some screws into the frame to hold everything together. So putting the spacers on was pretty easy. I used spacers to hold up the spacers, and then I put spacers on top of the spacers to put more spacers on, if that all makes sense. And then something you'll see here in a second, when I zoom out, you're going to see these 3 shims on either side of the large drawers. There was a tiny bit of a mismeasurement that I made, but using the 1/4 inch plywood on either side of it, before I put the spacers on, was a perfect fit. And then it was time to assemble all the drawers themselves. So I decided to take it over to my Craig laser beam. I do want to note that the Craig laser beam is not officially sold in stores, and don't ask me about it. So after I finished that, I counted all the drawer parts out to make sure I had everything in place. That way there was no holdup going to assembly. Assembly itself was super easy this way. Using a false drawer front to cover the pocket holes makes drawers so much easier. I don't really have the time to do any kind of fancy joinery, and this is also just shop furniture, so I'm not really worried about it. But using the pocket holes and just clamping the drawers together like this, making sure they're nice and square, went very, very quickly. These smaller drawers went together like a breeze using these Bessey parallel clamps. The even pressure that these clamps have just keeps everything nice and tight, especially if you line it up all square. And just like that, all 6 drawers were put together, and they just needed bottoms. The bottoms for these drawers were super easy to put together. I just ran a small bead of glue around the edges, and then Brad nailed it into position. Since these drawers won't be under any kind of huge load, this is going to be plenty of holding strength. Drawer slides went in like a breeze as well. I just used some spacer blocks to hold the drawer slide up to my spacers and put the bottom screw in, the middle screw, and then the front screw. I did this for all 4 bottom ones, and then the other ones I actually have a Craig jig for, which I didn't show in here because my camera battery had died, but that was very simple to use. I'm sure there's plenty of videos on that. The drawers themselves, trying to mount them is really easy. You just make sure to put a spacer on your very bottom drawer so it's not dragging on the bottom. You pull the mounting brackets out to the front of it, making sure that you don't extend past the front because then your false front won't fit correctly. And then you just put the first 2 screws in, you pull it out a little bit more, and you can put the second set of screws in the middle, and then you have 2 anchoring points which keep your last point in a line. At that point, you can just take the whole drawer out and then put your 3rd and final screw into the back of the mounting bracket. And then with the drawer mounts all set to go, I start moving on to the face frame, which the top and bottom pieces of, I used my biscuit joiner. And you can see where I'm putting my marks, that way I know exactly where my biscuits have to go on the station itself, as well as the face frame. A quick dry fit before you use any glue is always a good idea when doing biscuit joints, just in case something is a little off. And I repeat the same thing for the bottom as well, making marks, throwing my biscuits on, doing a dry fit, and then we go to glue up. Normally I would use a little bit more glue and I would spread it out on the whole surface, but like I said before, this is just shop furniture and I don't foresee this face frame taking any kind of pressure whatsoever. And before tightening down, I make sure everything is nice and lined up. You can see me take a mallet to that left side. It started slipping a little bit to the left, so before tightening everything down, I was able to adjust it a little bit. And the biscuit joints make it very easy to slide a little bit left and right, which I usually find pretty helpful. To put the drawer fronts on, I use a couple of washers as a spacer for the bottom drawer, which will hold them nice and even for me while I clamp them into exactly where I want them. And then I can pull the drawer out with these clamps holding the front on. That way I can drive a couple of screws in from behind. So I rinse and repeat here, just putting all of the drawer fronts on. I have them slightly inset. From videos I've seen online, the lathe tends to pretty much throw more wood at you than you started with. So I wanted these inset a little bit, that way hopefully the cracks of the drawers don't catch all of the wood falling off the lathe. So with the right side finished, and you'll see a big smile on my face when everything fits nice and cleanly, I move on to the left side, and then we go to the drawer handles. All I have to do is measure the width of my drawer, and then I have to minus the distance between the two holes in the handle, and that'll give me where my center point will be for each of the holes. Alright, so hopefully you can see this. My distance is exactly from the 1 to the 4-inch mark. So I have a 3-inch difference in my holes. Then what I'm going to do is take the width of my drawer, which this one is 16 1/8 minus 3, so I'm at 13 1/8. And then if you divide that by 2, you measure that distance right across, and that's going to be your first point. And then it's just a matter of lining this up, and you're good to go. So I decided to not just go for the lineup method. I do measure from both sides, and as you can see here, it's a perfect measurement. And you'll see that there's a little bit of an issue with the screw. It will only go through one sheet, so what I'll have to do is I'll have to drill my holes from the front and then widen them out in the back. That way the head of these screws can go through pretty much the whole first sheet of plywood there, which will let the screw protrude a little bit from the front, and we can attach our handles. I'm using just a little bit of masking tape to create the depth stop of where I need to drill to. That way I don't over drill these holes. So for some reason I thought it was a good idea to put the wheels on before I did the mounting holes for the drawer handles. I recommend not doing that, which is why I put them later in the video. That way if you choose to take any kind of instruction from this video, you'll know to do it in the correct order this time. So I had to give a lot of thought on how to mount the lathe. I didn't want to just go with measurements. I wanted something a little quicker and cleaner. So I decided to put the bolts that I'll be using to mount the lathe to the top and just draw around them with a pencil and then use a drill to go through from the top. And with another camera battery running out, we move on to finishing the project. I am using a water-based wipe-on polyurethane. It's from Minwax. It is a beautiful product and made this cheap $36 a sheet plywood from Home Depot look absolutely incredible. And the only thing I have to be careful of while putting the finish on here is to make sure that I don't drop some huge globs of the polyurethane into the mounting holes that I drilled for the handles. That way when it dries I don't have to go through and re-drill, which inevitably would scratch something and I would have to refinish it again. Even now, looking back on this video right here, I'm still in awe at how well this poly worked on this cheap plywood, it really took it to a different level that I wasn't expecting. I originally wasn't even going to finish the product, but I decided kind of last minute it might be easier to clean all the shavings off if I did, so I just kind of gave it a whirl. And after a couple coats and letting it dry, I assembled everything and we are left with a finished project. Alright everyone, that's going to do it for this one. Thank you all so much for watching. If you'd like to show your support, you can feel free to leave a like, subscribe, or leave a nice or helpful comment in the comment section below. And we'll see you next time.